Welcome everyone to part 2 of our module 5 for cognition. So as you probably noticed, we broke this into two different sections. Our first section really focused on memory and kind of all these different aspects of how we remember and think. What we're going to be talking about in the second half is more about intelligence and testing, right? So when we're referring to individual differences, in this aspect, we're referring mostly to this idea of intelligence. So we're going to start by just talking about what intelligence is in general, right? This is something that I think, as a society or as a kind of like a normal common conversation, you have a definition that maybe you could come up with, but you may not be able to necessarily nail it down. So that's what we're going to kind of try and be doing in this first section here, is just what really is intelligence at the end of the day. Let me move myself here. All right. So intelligence, our definition, or at least our psychological definition, is the ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new situations. Notice that this is a really, really broad definition. That's on purpose, and we're going to kind of discuss this a little bit later, and you'll see this as we go through. But there's a lot of different aspects that we want to bring in and make a part of intelligence. But again, there's three main pieces: learning from experience, solving problems, and using knowledge to adapt to new situations. Now, intelligence is really socially constructed. So what it means to be intelligent is going to look different in every single society. And when we say it's socially constructed, basically what that means is that what we define, right, what kind of attributes or what kind of things we define as the things that will make you successful is going to be different culture to culture to culture to culture. So, for example, let's say like in the United States, if you're able to make a lot of money, or you're able to get a really high degree like a PhD or an MD, people would probably call you intelligent because you're able to be successful in that society. And the things that allow you to, let's say, go and get a PhD or become a surgeon or something like that are going to be very different traits than the things that would make you very successful in, let's say, like a tribal community in South America, right? Where if I'm living in, a jungle and I'm living off the land, intelligence might be more about, how to hunt, how to find food, how to protect yourself from animals, how to treat illnesses with, local vegetation and kind of cures like that. So those two definitions, or the different things that we're looking at and we're saying this is what intelligence is, are going to look different. It's a lot of it has to do with our ability to adapt, our ability to be successful in whatever environment we live in. Now, there are multiple different ways that we look at intelligence in psychology. So there's basically four kind of main ideas of intelligence. And there's one big question that kind of separates the majority of them. So, and that question is really, is intelligence one thing, one kind of thing that applies to a whole bunch of other abilities and attributes in a person, or is it multiple different things and different things that you can be good at or poor at, and it's kind of a balancing act between all of those. So there's four main theories of intelligence. We're going to talk about all of these in the next slides. The first one is from Charles Spearman, which is general intelligence, or G. This is usually what you would refer to if you ever get like a number score for your intelligence, like an IQ test. It's going to be referring to general intelligence. This is what they call maybe like the G factor. We also have Howard Gardner, who created what is called the multiple intelligences theory, where he has 8 different intelligences, 8 different things that you can be intelligent in or maybe lower in. Robert Sternberg also uses multiple intelligence, but instead of having 8, he's actually brought it down to just 3 different things. So 3 different things that make up intelligence. And then we also have what's called emotional intelligence, which is a little bit different, but is maybe a factor that we could talk about as well. So let's talk first about Charles Spearman here. Whoops, sorry, I can't move myself. Come on. Sorry, my computer's finicking with me right now. Oh. I won't you click. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So our first theory of intelligence is from Charles Spearman, which is general intelligence, or G. It's this lowercase g. So basically the idea is that this one factor, intelligence, underlies all mental abilities. So basically anything that we do, everything that we do to measure intelligence is measuring the same thing, just different ways. So we're measuring every single test. So let's say you take an intelligence test, right, and you've got a bunch of questions that you answer. The idea is that all of those different questions are measuring the same thing, the same kind of overall idea. A lot of times too, this is where you'll get like a number score. So if you ever heard somebody give you like an IQ score, or you've heard of someone talk about their IQ, this is what they're talking about. IQ is basically a way of measuring intelligence, a number factor at least. Now, we've done things that actually kind of help support this idea of general intelligence. And one of the biggest things that we can see this in is what is called factor analysis, which I believe we've talked about a little bit at the very beginning of class when we were talking about research methods. So basically what factor analysis is it's a statistical procedure where we're looking at clusters of of related items, right? Or what are called factors. So if we have an IQ test, we might have a whole bunch of different things that we ask you about. We might ask you to solve math problems. We might ask you to solve physical objects. We might ask you to write something, to answer something orally, right? There could be all sorts of different things that we do. Now, all of those things are going to give us different scores, different answers, all sorts of different pieces. So factor analysis is looking at all of those and looking for clusters, right? Looking for where people are connected or where they are in groups. Now, when we do factor analysis on different types of intelligence tests, what we find is that there do tend to be clumps. There do tend to be these kind of underlying ideas where if someone is scoring really high somewhere, they're probably scoring pretty high elsewhere. A really simple way that you can see this, although it's not like a perfect example, but it gives you kind of an idea, is those of you right now, you're all in an AP class. And the chances are the majority of you in this AP class are also in at least one other, right? And if you're not, you're probably in honors classes in most of your classes. And you can probably see that, right? Now, it's a little tough right now because we're not in school, but we were literally in the building, and I'm sure you've noticed this before in other classes. You probably noticed that a lot of the students that you'll have in one class, you'll see in other classes with you, or they'll have similar schedules to you, right? So if I'm taking a few AP classes, I'm probably taking honors classes, even if it's math, English, science, social studies, art, right? You probably are a high level in a bunch of them. And that would kind of be this underlining G factor, this underlining general intelligence, that you're not just intelligent in one thing, you're intelligent in a whole bunch of different things. But it's all coming from this kind of underlying ability. And again, all these kind of different factors are going to go towards your overall score. We also have Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So multiple intelligences is a little different. And the idea is basically that intelligence isn't one underlying factor, like general intelligence. It's a bunch of different independent intelligences. So you can be intelligent in one way, but not in another, right? Or you can be intelligent in a few different ways, but a few other ones you're maybe not. So there are generally considered, at least in Gardner's, there's kind of a variety of different numbers that you'll give. He actually gives 8, but most of the time today we'll refer to 8 or sometimes even 6. The 8 ones are up there. I'm kind of blocking a few of them for you, unfortunately. But we have visual spatial, which is about, like art is a lot of times considered visual spatial. Logistic verbal. We have intrapersonal and interpersonal. Inter is about between other people. Intra is within yourself. Logical mathematical, which is probably pretty straightforward for the most part. Musical, which is probably straightforward as well. Bodily kinesthetic, which is your ability to move. And naturalistic, which has to do with nature and kind of like the universe and things like that. So Gardner would say that you can be intelligent in some, or technically you could be all of these ways, but they're really more individual, right? That you can be really high in logical mathematical, but you might also be pretty low in visual spatial. Okay, and this is kind of like the argument between the two, where Gardner would say that the reality is you're probably high in at least relatively high in all of these. Now, there is some things that do back up this idea of multiple intelligences, and one of the big ones is what is called savant syndrome. Now, we're going to look at some examples of savants a little bit later. I think not our first day, but our second day in class, we'll look at and talk about savants a little bit more. But we have what's called savant syndrome. So what savant syndrome is basically where a person that has a what is called an otherwise limited mental ability. So they are like on an IQ test, they wouldn't score super high. They struggle maybe even in their ability to care for themselves, or they have some sort of disability, maybe like autism or something similar to that. But what makes them a savant is that although they have, generally speaking, low mental abilities, they have one thing that they are incredible at, right? Exceptional. They are beyond the normal person. So we've seen savants, and we'll look at some examples of these. Some of them where they have trouble functioning interpersonally or trouble caring for themselves, but they'll be able to draw entire cities from a 5-minute flyover in a plane or a helicopter or something like that. Or we'll have people who literally cannot function on their own. They need to be taken care of, but are able to memorize literally everything they read. Or they're able to play music at an incredibly high level as a really, really young child. Or so there's kind of all these different things, but the main idea is that they are low functioning. They have limited mental ability generally, but one thing that they're incredible at, that they're exceptional at, and that would be a savant. And again, this kind of supports these ideas that all these intelligences aren't necessarily linked. That takes us to Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. Again, that means there's 3 pieces to it. So there is more to success, according to him, than traditional intelligence, and he proposed this triarchic theory of 3 different intelligences. So there's 3 parts to it here, and you can kind of see the triangle, the pyramid in the corner there. So first we have what is called analytic intelligence, which is our ability to solve well-defined problems with a single answer. So you can kind of think of like math is a really good example of this. When you get a math problem, generally speaking, not necessarily always, but generally speaking, there is a right and a wrong answer. There's one answer that at the end of the day, this is the right answer. And everything else is wrong, right? Math problems are very well defined. You know everything about the problem from the math problem, right? There's not like hidden numbers that you don't get to see. Everything is in there. It's very well defined, and there's a single answer. We also have what is called creative intelligence, which is pretty straightforward, right? This ability to generate new ideas, these new things that are novel and helpful as well. Like it needs to be something useful. We talked about creativity a little bit earlier with thinking, so it's just your ability to do that, to come up with something new that is going to be useful in a new or a novel situation. We also have what is called practical intelligence. You can kind of think of practical intelligence as like street smarts. It's kind of a good way, I think, of referring to it, or the way that people refer to it. So it's expertise and talent that help to complete the tasks and manage the complex challenges of everyday life. So if you had a high level of practical intelligence, maybe you're not necessarily super good in school, or you're not necessarily really high achieving, right, as far as your ability to do, analytically solve problems, but you are able to be really successful with life, right? Maybe you understand people really well and you're able to work with them and use them. Maybe you're able to organize different things. Maybe you're able to make a business and be really successful that way, right? All of those things would be kind of considered practical intelligence, things for your everyday life. So the Triarchic theory is basically that there's these 3 different pieces to intelligence. Now, again, you could be higher or lower in certain ones of these, and that's kind of again, that main difference between our multiple intelligences and our general intelligence. So let's talk about some of the criticisms of different intelligence theories. So one thing we do know is that when we do research using factor analysis, this is what I mentioned before, we know that there is at least some level of general intelligence factor, right? We do see that if I took a whole bunch of people and I gave them all a bunch of different types of intelligence tests, what I would basically see is that people that are scoring high in one area are going to generally score high in a variety of areas. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be, the highest scorer everywhere, right? You can be a little bit better at some things than others, but you are going to see these kind of clusters, right? Where if I'm generally intelligent, I'm going to do well. If I'm generally in the middle, I'm going to be in the middle. And if I'm low, I'm going to be low on all these different kind of scores. And again, this factor predicts high performance on various tasks in various jobs. So kind of this idea that if you score high on an intelligence test, you could probably do a large variety of different things, right? You could do science, you can do English, you can do math, you can do more of like the social studies, you could do art maybe, but you can do kind of all these different factors due to this underlining piece. Now, there is also an underlying criticism of intelligence theories in general, which is that if we are trying to measure success, which generally speaking we are when it comes to intelligence, intelligence on its own isn't enough to give a perfect kind of analysis, right? A perfect score. So there is also what we call grit is generally what we're referring to it as. But grit has to do with our passion, our ability to persevere, our willingness to put time in and effort in to be successful. And I'm sure all of you have experienced that and seen that, right? There's some things that maybe you put a lot of time and effort into and you get better and better at those things, where there's other things that maybe you don't put a lot of time and effort into. And because of that, right, you maybe struggle a little bit more. So, or even in school is a really good example, right? School in some ways measures intelligence, but it also measures how hard you're willing to work. You probably all know people who maybe aren't the most intelligent person, but work really hard and do really well. You probably also know other people who are really intelligent, but don't work that hard and then aren't very successful. So there's kind of at least a few different factors, right? There's at least intelligence plus something else like grit that would be able to then measure success for us. So let's talk a little bit about emotional intelligence here. So emotional intelligence has to do with our ability to do three basic things: to perceive, to understand, and to manage emotions. And actually, I'm sorry, there's four things. And perceive, understand, manage, and use emotions. So there's kind of those four different pieces, and each of them is going to look a little bit different. So when we're talking about perceiving, it has to do with recognizing emotions in other people. So when I am talking to someone and I'm looking at their face, can I read their facial expression and understand what they're feeling or what they're kind of thinking emotionally? When I read a story, do I understand and feel the emotion of that story? When I'm listening to music or watching a movie, right? Am I able to perceive what's happening, right? Understand the emotion of what's going on in those different things. We also have understanding, which is our ability to see what are called blended emotions, which is basically combinations. So emotions aren't necessarily like, and we'll get into this more in our next, not next unit, but the unit after that. When we talk about emotion, you don't necessarily just feel one thing, right? Like when you're upset, you might not just be sad. You might also be frustrated or angry. You can be kind of like melancholy, where like things are good, but also like you don't feel super great. You're maybe a little bit sad or a little depressed. You can have like kind of these mixtures here. So this understand part is our ability to see blended emotions, to be able to see combinations of different types of emotions within people and understand them, right? And in addition, then, when we are able to do that, we can then predict the emotional states and changes in not only ourselves, but in other people. So someone who is really good at understanding emotions will know, okay, if I'm going to have this conversation with this person, I know what they're going to feel, right? Maybe even before they have that conversation. I know what's going to happen here. I know how they're going to react. That would be someone with a high level of understanding. And also in yourself, right? So maybe you have to have a really tough conversation with someone. If you have this high level of understanding, you'll not only know, okay, this is how they're going to react, but I know how I'm going to react when I'm confronted with that, right? I know that when I am confronted with someone who's very upset, this is what I do. This is how I get. That would be a high level of emotional intelligence in this understanding kind of piece. We also have managing, which is pretty straightforward, right? The modulation and expression of emotions in various situations. So am I able to express my emotions well? Am I able to control my emotions to a point where they are maybe useful, or at least they are, not released in a way I don't want them to be? So if I'm really angry, am I able to modulate and control that enough to where I can do whatever I'm supposed to do, or do I just release it regardless of what's happening? That would be this managing. And then the last part is using, which is pretty straightforward. So using emotions to fuel whatever it is we need to fuel. So this is a really big thing. I think about this just because of my background from like an athletic point of view, right? Of going from, okay, if I'm frustrated or I'm upset or I'm angry or I'm sad or whatever, how do I take that emotion and use it towards something productive, right? How do I use it to do better as opposed to worse? How do I use it to create something? If maybe I'm a musician, right? A lot of the really great artwork comes out of really horrible emotions, right? Some of the most beautiful songs in the world come from people who are deeply depressed or struggling with something really, really challenging. And so what those people are doing is those are people who are really good at using those. So they're taking that emotion that they're feeling and they're using it to create something or do something with it. And that would kind of round it out. So someone who is incredibly emotionally intelligent would be good at all of these different things. Now, again, this is kind of considered separate. It would maybe be like a piece of maybe like an idea of multiple intelligences where we have this different kind. Again, you would probably argue that people that are highly intelligent would also be emotionally intelligent, or at least would likely be emotionally intelligent. Okay, so that's going to wrap up this first piece. So please take some time, do a quick summary, and I'll see you guys next time.